The Trump administration has officially designated the Confucius Institute U.S. Center as a foreign mission of China. A whistleblower is facing death threats after exposing corruption in the Chinese Red Cross. And China is playing up the possibility of a war with the United States. We'll be going into this. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The Trump administration has now officially designated the Confucius Institute U.S. Center as a foreign mission of China. A State Department press release from Secretary Mike Pompeo says the new designation recognizes the organization for what it is, quote, an entity advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence campaign on U.S. campuses and K-12 classrooms. It notes that Confucius Institutes are funded by the Chinese regime and are part of the CCP system for global influence and propaganda. Now, while the designation doesn't ban the institutes from operating, Pompeo noted in the statement that it can help schools make informed decisions on whether the programs backed by the Chinese Communist Party should be allowed to continue on their campuses, and also helps them more clearly discern the role of the CCP spreading its influence. Now, in other news, a whistleblower in a Chinese Red Cross scandal has issued a call for help. Jiang Pengyang exposed how the Chinese Red Cross has been reselling virus protective gear that it receives through donations. Now, Jiang said in an interview with the Epoch Times that he had previously decided to do business with the Chinese Red Cross, and since exposing its crimes, he has received death threats and has also been threatened with jail time. Now, he has since fled to South Korea and said, quote, my wife is 2 months pregnant, and I don't want my child to live in fear in the future. Save me, save my unborn child. And so again, what he has been exposing is that the Chinese Red Cross has been taking donations of this PPE, this personal protective equipment to protect from the virus, and it's been taking that and selling it on the global market. And after he exposed this, he himself has faced death threats. Meanwhile, with the disasters, a fourth flood wave has now reached the upper reaches of China's longest river, the Yangtze River. Now, Chinese authorities confirmed the coming floods on August 14th, and the CCP's state-run news outlet Xinhua reported that waters are rapidly rising in the reservoir of the Three Gorges Dam. Now, the Ministry of Water Resources reported that by 5 a.m. on August 14th, the reservoir saw an inflow of close to 1.8 million cubic feet per second. This is expected to reach close to 2 million cubic feet per second by early morning on August 15th. Now, the Ministry of Water Resources called city and provincial governments along the Yangtze River, and Xinhua reported that it told them to spare no efforts in preparing for the coming floods. And this is significant also. This is official CCP reporting. Typically, the Chinese Communist Party, in previous examples of this, has not really warned different cities and provinces beforehand. They're taking additional measures now to warn them. Now, the Yangtze River Water Conservancy Commission also issued notices to various provinces to request data to better prepare for the various disasters now hitting the country. Now, in Sichuan province, meanwhile, a landslide in a village on the morning of August 14th swept away 2 homes. At least 1 person was killed and 2 are still missing. Also in Sichuan, multiple villages have been destroyed by the floods. Videos show that in some places floodwaters were shoulder high, and in other areas, cars and brick homes were submerged in the water. Now in Hong Kong, meanwhile, the local police union has been reportedly transferring its assets to Chinese banks in fear it may be hit by U.S. sanctions. Hong Kong pro-democracy news outlet Apple Daily reported the Hong Kong Police Credit Union issued a notice to its members early this week stating it has been preparing for foreign sanctions since May. It has transferred the assets of its members to multiple Chinese banks. Now, the amount is close to $1.5 billion, and the union noted that the work of moving this money is still in process. Now, when the United States placed sanctions on officials involved in measures that undermine Hong Kong's autonomy, 2 police chiefs were included in those. Now, Solomon Yeo, vice chairman of the Republican Overseas Affairs Organization, which has repeatedly supported the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement, made a recommendation to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on his Twitter page that the Hong Kong Police Credit Union should be banned from trading in U.S. dollars. Now, President Donald Trump also weighed in on the CCP's attacks on press freedom in Hong Kong. While responding to a question from an Epoch Times reporter during an August 13th press conference, Trump said this.
Thank you, Mr.
Please.
President.
Thank you.
I would like to ask your opinion about what recently happened in Hong Kong, recent attack on press freedom in Hong Kong, and Jimmy Lai was arrested, his newsroom was raided. How will the U.S. respond to this?
Well, I think it's a terrible thing, but one thing that we have done, we gave tremendous incentives to Hong Kong because of freedom. We want freedom. And we were giving tremendous economic incentives to Hong Kong, and we have now withdrawn all of those incentives. And it will be impossible for Hong Kong to compete with the United States with respect to that. It just won't be, because we've taken all of the incentives away. If you look at China with the World Trade Organization as an example, they're getting tremendous because they're considered a developing nation, which is ridiculous. Why should they be a developing nation, but we're not? And they get tremendous incentives. We have, by the way, told them it's unacceptable, and we've been doing that for a long time. They understand exactly how we feel, and big changes are being made. But with respect to Hong Kong, they get tremendous financial incentives so that they could do business and compete in the world. We've now withdrawn all of those incentives. It's going to be very hard for Hong Kong to compete. And I will tell you that the United States, and I say this from any standpoint you want to hear it, will end up making a lot more money because of it, because we lost a lot of business to Hong Kong. We made it very convenient for people to go there, for companies to go there. We've withdrawn all of that. And the United States will be a big beneficiary from an economic standpoint. But I hate to see what happened to Hong Kong, because freedom is a great thing.
Now, his comments come after Hong Kong police arrested several people on August 9th. Included among them was Jimmy Lai. He's a media mogul and founder of the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. Meanwhile, a U.S. company, Pure Circle, has been fined $575,000 for importing stevia, this artificial sweetener, from China that was produced using forced labor. Now, U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in a press release that the stevia was produced in China by Inner Mongolia Hengzheng Group, Bao'angzhou Agriculture and Trade. Now, Brenda Smith, Executive Assistant Commissioner of CBP's Office of Trade, said in a release that, quote, as part of its trade enforcement responsibilities, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, will hold companies accountable for importing goods produced with forced labor. Meanwhile, when it comes to diplomacy, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo secured support from Slovenia on a 5G clean network security campaign, which would exclude untrusted vendors, including many Chinese companies, from the country's 5G networks. Now, during this press conference, Pompeo said this.
The contrast between free and unfree societies has never been clear, and free nations must work together to confront authoritarian threats. Chief among those threats is the Chinese Communist Party and its drive to control people and information and our economies. The tide is turning against the Chinese Communist Party and its efforts to restrict freedom for all of us.
Now, the Trump administration launched its Clean Network campaign back in April. It expanded the program on August 5th. Now, this program aims to protect the private information of American citizens and U.S. businesses online, and has a heavy focus on rooting out companies from U.S. networks tied to the CCP. This includes ensuring that CCP carriers are not connected to U.S. telecommunications networks. It includes removing apps from app stores that have connections to the CCP and that could be used to threaten privacy and to spread disinformation. It also focuses on keeping U.S. infrastructure, including cloud technologies and undersea cables, free from CCP intrusion. And as Pompeo is now showing, the U.S. is promoting this initiative abroad. Meanwhile, the CCP has begun its military drills in the Taiwan Strait. Now, a spokesperson for the Eastern Theater of the regime's People's Liberation Army said on August 13th that the drill was intended to strengthen operational coordination among its various units. Now, the military spokesperson also gave an implied reference to the United States, again hinting at the real purpose of these drills. Without directly mentioning a country, he said some major powers have continued moves with Taiwan that the CCP views as negative, as they allegedly support Taiwan independence. Now, he accused these moves of threatening peace and security in the Taiwan Strait. This is, of course, as the Chinese Communist Party is making military threats against Taiwan to seize it by force. Now, following the statements from the People's Liberation Army spokesman, the United States sent an RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft to Kandina Air Base in the Pacific. A U.S. Navy PA-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft was also spotted over the South China Sea. This again suggests the U.S. is monitoring the situation. Now for the broader stories for today. First off, Xi Jinping's wolf warrior diplomacy is getting pushback from hardliners in the CCP leadership who believe it's more effective for the regime to use a strategy from former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping to, quote, hide our capability and bide our time. Now, among Xi's two main critics are two PLA hawks, including retired Major General Qiao Liang, author of Unrestricted Warfare, which proposed a form of unconventional war for the CCP to dominate other countries by weaponizing open systems, including in culture, economy, and ideology. Now, in his open criticisms of Xi's approach, Qiao stated, quote, don't treat the pandemic as an opportunity to take back Taiwan by force. China's ultimate goal is not the reunification of Taiwan, but to achieve, as he says, the dream of national rejuvenation so that all 1.4 billion Chinese can have a good life. Can it be achieved by taking Taiwan back? Of course not. Now, he posted another message as well, stating that a move by the CCP's People's Liberation Army to take Taiwan by force could cause the U.S. to declare war on the CCP. Now, is Qiao Liang's true intention of his comments really about the prosperity of 1.4 billion Chinese people? I don't think so. But what he is alluding to is that Xi Jinping has used an ineffective method to exploit and manipulate other countries. Now, he, among others, believes that Xi's wolf warrior diplomacy has gone too far against Deng Xiaoping's strategy, again, of keeping a low profile and biding one's time. And as a result has ruined the U.S.-China relationship, which brought China large-scale benefits through unfair trade practices. Now, as a bit of background on Deng Xiaoping's strategy in the 1980s, originally the phrase he used meant, quote, keeping a low profile. But in the context of China's foreign policy back then, it took on a different meaning. That is, stealing in a humble or a secretive way so that nobody would be aware or could hold them accountable. Now, how is that different from Xi's strategy today? If you look at everything Xi has done lately, at the height of the U.S.-China tensions, Xi has used a rather upfront and exaggerated approach. Today, the tactic of posing as a global hero while condemning the enemy countries is no longer working. And as the world has seen the true colors of the CCP through this pandemic, as well as through years and years of being exploited by it economically, and now more than ever they are uniting against the CCP. The only population it can brainwash with its wolf warrior tactic is a portion of the Chinese people, but not the rest of the world. Now, the wolf warrior diplomacy tactic emerged at the height of the CCP virus pandemic, when Xi was faced with a worrying Chinese economy on the inside and a Western world beginning to distrust China on the outside. And now at that time, Xi's priority was to stay aggressive and pose as a figure stronger than ever, in the face of Western, quote, bullying and insults. And why was this? Because the CCP views political stability as its top priority. And in order to ensure its stability, it must keep fooling and brainwashing the Chinese people. By strengthening the Chinese people's ardent loyalty and validation for the party, the CCP can still retain its facade regardless of the economic situation or global condemnations. Now, is this tactic an inevitable path for Xi to take? Now, such a strategy will very likely not last long, as the Chinese economy and the Chinese people are suffering. The failure of this strategy is very likely to be the reason why Chinese diplomats have softened their tone when addressing U.S.-China relations in the past few days. No matter what diplomatic tactic the CCP leaders gravitate towards, however, their words cannot be trusted, and national leaders around the world are becoming increasingly aware of this. Just as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, distrust and verify. And Xi Jinping has gained the nickname internally in China of the, quote, chief accelerator, as everything he does, particularly with the CCP's aggressive diplomacy, seems to have accelerated the process of the CCP's demise. Meanwhile, the Chinese regime is playing up the possibility of a war with the United States. The Gatestone Institute noted in a report that Chinese military journalists are now openly urging the CCP's military to immediately prepare for an attack by the United States in the South China Sea, and they're alleging the U.S. is trying to intentionally provoke the CCP. Now, the report notes that if this type of military analysis gains traction among the CCP's military and political leaders, the United States, quote, should plan for the possibility that China might initiate hostilities in keeping with its doctrine of preemptive retaliation, a seeming attempt falsely to claim self-defense. Now, similar analysis can be found even outside the CCP's military journalists. The South China Morning Post, for example, questioned in an August 12th story, quote, is the U.S. preparing for a hot war with China? The CCP, meanwhile, has deployed bombers to the South China Sea, and satellite images also showed a Pakistani submarine with the Chinese Navy. There have been many incidents like this recently. Now, what does all this mean? The Chinese Communist Party is trying to use the image of a war with the United States in its propaganda. It is painting this picture, along with sanctions and bans on Chinese products, as signs of U.S. aggression trying to stop China's rise. Now, Chinese authorities have issued orders to not fire first in a conflict with the United States. But when it comes to the CCP, an order like this could just be easily a ruse. And the United States isn't showing signs of backing down or jumping into a hot war either. And CCP military leaders are warning Xi, meanwhile, about the potential that his policies could lead to a war with the United States. It's something they're saying in their own advice to him that they do not want, especially were he to attempt to attack Taiwan. Now, even the hardliners, as I mentioned just a bit ago, view this as a poorly calculated move. Chinese military analysts believe the U.S. military could defeat the Chinese Navy and its Air Force within a few hours. And so the CCP's military strategies for an actual war with the United States would include either a surprise attack using things such as high Earth orbit nuclear detonation coupled with an all-out aggressive strike, or the CCP pulling forces back within its own borders to rely on missile defense systems. With the CCP in the global spotlight right now, a surprise attack would be difficult for it, and pulling back within its own borders would be counterintuitive for its ambitions beyond China's borders. Now, meanwhile, when it comes to the economy, Wall Street is allegedly worried that the Chinese regime is going to launch reciprocal attacks on U.S. tech companies. This is as the United States bans TikTok and WeChat, and amid sanctions on Chinese companies. Among the big companies that have come into the sights are Apple and Tesla, in terms of concern among investors. Now, here's something important to note on this. If Western companies are allowed to operate in China, it means one of two things. One would be if the Chinese Communist Party needs them. They'd refer to companies like this as, quote, sparring partners. The idea of a sparring partner is you learn from them, you practice with them until you're able to beat them. When the CCP can beat them, it kicks them out of the country. The second is if the companies have been regulated enough and have conceded enough to the CCP that they basically function like Chinese companies in China. And so in either case, the Chinese Communist Party will only allow companies in China if it needs them. It's not likely to kick companies out if it needs them still. And so we'll have to see how this unfolds. Meanwhile, calls are growing around the world to stand up to the CCP and its systems of control. In Japan, reports note the CCP's influence operations. Tibetans in countries around the world are set to hold a poll to elect the new government in exile, again not recognizing the CCP's claims over Tibet. In Canada, there are growing voices among the Chinese dissident communities, including Hong Kong protesters, Tibetans, and others. And new alliance of dissident groups are forming there. They're calling on local leadership in Canada to condemn the Chinese regime for its abuses, including in Hong Kong. Australia, meanwhile, is investigating foreign interference in its research, paying closer attention to the CCP's activities down in Antarctica, and is becoming more vocal against the CCP's actions in the South China Sea.
And we've continued to advocate very strongly for freedom of navigation through those waters, and we've been very supportive, whether it's been of Indonesia, or I remember standing next to Prime Minister Phuc in Vietnam and commending him on the strong position that he has taken when it is in relation to their interests being compromised in relation to the South China Sea.
And similar developments are happening elsewhere, including in Germany, the UK, India, parts of Africa. The list could go on and on. And in addition to this, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is traveling to other countries to warn about the CCP's subversive activities. And the hostile actions of the Chinese regime have been a rallying call for new alliances against the CCP. And related to this, the CCP could have a chance to mend relations with some countries, but it's not showing signs of heading in that direction. Amid growing tensions with India, for example, a Chinese envoy recently said that the onus is, quote, not on China when it comes to diffusing the tensions. Now, what are we seeing here? I think we should look at the trajectory of these changes. What we're seeing is that many countries in the world, again, are uniting against the CCP. Even those that are not uniting together with other countries, like Vietnam, for example, are becoming more vocal against the CCP. And what is the trajectory of this? What is the direction that all these incidents are heading in? Well, the trajectory of it is this. New alliances are forming. Countries in just about every part of the world are looking into Chinese influence operations that have happened on their own soil. They're starting to root these things out. They're pulling companies out of China. Yes, there's some investment heading into China, but given the state of the Chinese economy, it's unlikely that that will turn out well for these investors. And so again, what's the trajectory? The trajectory is that the world is breaking away from the CCP.
Rather than helping the world, General Secretary Xi has shown the world the party's true face. We talked about how we've seen Hong Kong's freedoms crushed. We've watched the CCP bully its neighbors, militarize features in the South China Sea, and instigate a deadly confrontation with India. We think that the entire world needs to work together to ensure that every country, including China, behaves in the international system in ways that are appropriate and consistent with the international order. You can't go make claims for maritime regions that you have no lawful claim to.
Tensions with the CCP are increasing, and different issues of Chinese corruption, different types of subversion, and these types of things in other countries, including in the United States, including in Canada, and including in most countries in the world for that matter, are all being exposed. The trajectory of this is that the CCP is losing its influence. It's being attacked from every direction. And in other news, after people across the United States and elsewhere began receiving these unsolicited packets of seeds that were coming from China, people in the US are now receiving unsolicited deliveries of face masks from China. Now, what are we seeing here? Now, the initial analysis of the seed packets, where the USDA was looking into it, it suggests they were not harmful, but the investigations are still ongoing. It appeared to be a scheme to manufacture positive ratings for their online stores. But a big concern with these seeds, going back to the seeds, was around what's called environmental warfare, also known as ecological warfare. This is actually publicly listed in the Chinese military doctrine. In fact, one of the individuals we discussed earlier, this Qiao Liang, wrote the book Unrestricted Warfare, co-authored it, and that book directly talks about this. What is ecological warfare or environmental warfare? It is the intentional destruction of the environment for military purposes, such as the CCP damming off the Mekong River and cutting off water supplies to countries downstream. That would be environmental warfare. Creating, say, different programs to, say, destroy natural resources in a certain country, to, for example, send seeds that might pollute the soil in key areas. This would be called ecological warfare. It is part of the Chinese Communist Party's open discussions on unconventional war. With these face masks, however, now the CCP was shipping shoddy face masks and other protective equipment to countries around the world at the height of the pandemic. This was already taking place. It's possible there's something more sinister with these face masks, but again, given the context of this, it does seem like this is just another rating scam. Now we'll have to see how this develops, and again, we'll be keeping coverage on this as things go forward. Now with that said, folks, again, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And also, if you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to that in the description below. And if you haven't already also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. And if you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Now with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.